Hey, Jim Bravo. I'm working on the cylinder head from my 2003 S2000 today. I just got it back from the machine shop a day or two ago. Um, I made a previous video about the ticking noise from the car. I did a lot of diagnosis on it. I really couldn't figure out what's wrong with it. The leak down test showed a little bit excess leak down from the exhaust side, so I thought maybe that's where my issue was. I sent the head off to a machine shop locally in Nashville. Um, and they said the uh, intake valves, one of the angles, I think they said it was around here, was a little sharp on all of the intake valves. Also the valve guides on the exhaust side, they said were worn out. I think they said they were all of the exhaust valve guides. I'm not real sure, but so they, as you can see, they recut all the valves, intake and exhaust, and the seats too, and then they replaced the exhaust valve guides, resurfaced the head, cleaned it. As far as I can tell, it's ready to go. So I wanted to make a video on how to reassemble it. I couldn't find a whole lot on YouTube or online. So we're starting with a complete bare head, and I've got a digital Honda manual. So I'm just going to go through the manual, install it, install the parts how the manual says to do it. If anything looks wrong, blame Honda, don't blame me. And if you have any questions, if you come across my video, feel free to leave a question in the comments. If you see anything I've done wrong, it's likely the engine will be put back together and reassembled before I see your comment or before anyone sees the video. So I guess I'll figure that out later. But here we go. Alright, so first thing it says to do, we're going to start with the exhaust side. Coat the valve stems with engine oil, install the valves in the valve guides. Valve stems, I've got a little bit of Castrol 10W30. It says coat them all in engine oil, put them all in there. And just shove them up in there, trying to be careful not to damage anything, damage the stem. Nick anything on the way up. The next step says to check the valves move up and down smoothly. So when I'm installing them, I'm just going to move them up and down, in and out. I guess they're about as smooth as they should be. And I'll probably fast forward through the rest of the exhaust valves because they should all be the same. Okay, so I did sort of a test run before I started filming, and I think this might be kind of tricky. Whenever you tilt the head back over it, the valves tend to want to fall out. Might be easier to do this one valve at a time, but I think it'll be quicker if I can get them all to stay in place. And I've got at least 8 fingers, right? I can probably hold them all in there while I do this. Cool. sure none of them are in a bind. All right. So, step 3, install the spring seats on the cylinder head. Here are our seats. Doesn't say to lube them, anything like that, so let's just drop all those on there. Right, install the new valve seal using the valve guide seal installer. So, as far as that, I don't have a valve guide seal installer. I don't think it's necessary either. I did some valve seal replacement when I was younger, and I always use a socket, and it's been a little while, so I did some research, really just Google searching, and found that people were still using sockets, so that's what I'm going to do today. Seems like it still works out. I've got a Craftsman 10mm 6-point. It seems that the valve guide seal fits perfectly in there. The little ridge around here, the rubber part, doesn't catch. It seems like the socket stops right on the metal part, so I think that's perfect to use. So we'll use that as our seal installer. It says, note, the exhaust valve seal has a black spring, and the intake valve seal has a white spring. That looks silver to me, but let's just call it white. So this will be the intake side, the black will be the exhaust side. It says they are not interchangeable, so don't screw that up. All right. Just make sure you guys can see that. Slide over the valve stem, slide it down, twisting it a little bit so it doesn't catch, and I think the oil on there helps. Let's just press like it shows and see what happens. So I thought I would feel or hear a little click or pop, and I didn't, but I did see it kind of make the movement like it would, and it's not moving down any further, so we'll move on to the next one. See what
I thought I read somewhere someone said they coat the stem seal with oil. I'm not gonna do that. Maybe I'll just do it like that. So that one popped. It's too reddish here, so I'm hoping to get it pop again. Nope. No, just keep on, keep on.
Okay. So it didn't say whether or not it should have a second click or pop or whatever, or how far down it's supposed to go. I took a quick look in the manual and it didn't exactly show anything. So I'm just assuming you press until it stops. Hopefully that's right. Making sure you can kind of see a little bit of a gap, space between the bottom of the valve guide seal and that spring seat. So just making sure they're all about even. This last one, so whenever I got the head back, this last valve guide seal seemed like it had a couple extra marks on it. Maybe they had trouble installing it or had to pull it out to reinstall. So it seems like the valve guide seal is it's a little different height than the rest of them. I'll use my 12 socket, see if that does me any better. Maybe I can give it a quick tap with a mallet and see if that gets it past that point. Nope, but it is as far down as it'll go. I don't want to really bang on it too much, so just install some valve springs on this side. I don't want to move on to the intake side. I have all the exhaust valves drop down into the deck, into my table here. So let's just put all the springs on first on the exhaust side, and then once we're completely done, we'll move on to the intake side. So install the valve spring and retainer. Place the end of the valve spring with the closely wounded coils toward the cylinder head. As you can see, these are wound a little closer than these. If you spin them around, it's like that too. So also on the valve springs at the top of them, I don't know if you can tell from the video, but there's like here it looks blue. I thought it was green. Maybe it's when it was cleaned or whatever, but a little bit of a blue paint on the top side on all of them. Let me grab a couple and show them to you. This might show up a little better. Like blue paint on the top side of the exhaust valve springs, and on the intake side, it's hard to tell, but some yellow paint. So that's also another way to determine which side's up. The side with the paint, no paint, paint. Closely wound spring. That's the side you want down. All right. So our valve spring, paint up, retainer on, and let's see. I've got this tool. Really, it kind of sucks, but it's simple to use. It sucks because here I had to grind it. It says it's for a K20, K24, S2000 F20C, but as you can tell, I had to grind it. If the head's not on the car, I'm sure it's okay with the head and everything, the intake manifold and injectors on, it just won't work. So this is where I had to grind mine. I got it from eBay. It's a street race. That's how I had to grind it. That's how far I had to grind it, just to get it to clear. I think the fuel rail, probably what it is. But I mean, it's okay. It's at least you can use it while the head's still on the car. You don't have to pull the heads off to replace the retainers or the valve stem seals or any of that stuff. So it does the job. So these don't need to be super tight, just lightly snug. You want to make sure your valve is all the way up. It might slip down. Hopefully our stem seal will hold it up. So a couple tricks with this. And actually you can, if you're replacing your retainers or doing the stem seals or whatever while the head's still in the car and everything's still assembled, that'll help too. But so first thing you want to do is whenever you have everything lined up, just make sure I'm not blocking your view. You want to back your screw all the way out. You don't want to see any of it or feel any of it sticking out, because you might not get this little piece on straight. Line it up with your retainer, but also you want to make sure it's fairly straight. But if it's not, which is probably what I'm going to run into. I'll show you how to deal with that too. All right. See if we can get this. So you can kind of see, I don't know if you can see in the video, but here, let's see here. As I'm doing this, you can kind of see this little ring start to get exposed. And that's where your cotter or keeper is going to latch onto. So I've done this a few times so far. I've actually, on this head, I swapped the intake side for the AP2 retainers, and then pulled them back off, put them back on a couple times, trying to diagnose this ticking issue. So pretty familiar with how this goes. A couple things to make it easier though. So this is like a plastic paper type weird thing, which I'm going to put some engine assembly grease on, not like oil. I'll show you. It's more like a thicker substance. That's how it looks. And I'll show you why I'm doing that right now. It helps with the installation. But what you want to do is grab two of your little cotters there. Sorry, keepers, cotters, peepers. Put a tiny little dab of this engine assembly grease on the inside, and that's going to help it stay on the valve while you install the other one, or while you're pulling the spring back up. And then a little dab on your, so I've got a tiny little jeweler's screwdriver, a flathead, and if you put a little dab on it, it'll hold your cotter in place while you try to install it. So just kind of snake it in there. And it's going to be easiest if you put it in the slot closest to you, but then the next one won't have that open. So once you have it in place, then kind of slide it around, spin it around to the back side, so the next one isn't so difficult. So again, a little dab, hold it on the valve, a little dab to hold it on your little screwdriver. And then we can put it on our valve stem. All right. And if it falls off or comes up crooked or anything like that, you can fix it a little easier, but let's just see. So you want to, it's easier to do this with, if you're using this tool, with a an impact or something like that, and do it slowly. So if it starts coming up crooked, or one of your cotters is catching or fell off or anything like that, you can kind of stop it there and fix it before it gets caught and pops into the air. All right, cool. So with this tool, I'll have to pull the screw out completely, put it into the next one, just until I can feel the tip, just the tip. Pull our valve up and repeat. So I'll probably speed up this section of it unless I run into an issue, or one of the cotters is crooked or anything like that, just to show you how that turns out. All right, actually, here's one thing you'll probably experience. You don't really know until you get down a little lower than the top of the valve stem if it's going to be straight aligned or whatever. If the spring doesn't go completely straight down, your valve is going to be a little off center in the retainer, which doesn't seem like it's going to be a problem, but whenever you try to raise the spring back up, it's going to catch on one of your cotters and then pop up. But let's see if I can show you how to fix that without having to pull everything back apart. And really, it's not a huge deal, but this will save you at least a minute or two. So let's just grab 2 more cotters and go at it. Okay, an easy enough thing to do. Get a screwdriver, something thin, and as you'll notice here, you can kind of have a section to pry on a little bit. And it doesn't require much force, but as you're coming up, if you apply a little bit of force to it, you can straighten it just enough that it clears your cotter and you don't waste any extra time. And we're doing this on 16 valves, so it's likely you're gonna run into this problem on a few of them, probably half of them. So just save you 30 seconds to a minute each, and that really adds up. So I'll just keep on with the rest of them. Okay, so that's what I was warning you about. If it's not coming up exactly right, one of your cotters gets caught on the retainer, they'll kind of pop off. Thankfully, this one didn't go flying across the room. Let's try that again. Alright. Now onto the intake side. Process should be the same as exhaust side. now we're ready for this. Now is a good time, if you've got an AP1 head, to go ahead and upgrade your retainers if you hadn't already to the AP2 stuff. Even if you hadn't had any issues. Actually, this had a little over 100,000 miles, and the original AP1 intake retainers didn't have any issues. They weren't cracked, or the valves weren't dropped or lower or sunk or anything like that. But just kind of a good guarantee or peace of mind. You don't have to worry about it again. AP2s are apparently as good as aftermarket as far as reliability. Oops. Getting ahead of myself here. Right, now I'm going to wipe all this assembly grease off the top of them, just to make sure all of my cotters are seated properly in the retainer. With all that grease in there, you can't really tell. That's it. If I find any cotters not seated right, I'll just put the valve spring compressor back on them, fix them. But in the meantime, I'll make another video of me installing the head on the block on the car, which is, let's see if I can get this free. Just here. I'll do that in the next couple days, hoping to have it all complete and running again by the weekend. But I'll update you with anything I'm doing. Thanks a lot.